An Oklahoma father has killed his wife and 3 of his kids, leaving his 10-year-old to find them. Around 9:30 yesterday morning, police responded to a call from a young boy who said that everyone in his home was dead. Officers described it as nothing short of a massacre, with Jonathan shooting Lindsay, Ethan, Dylan, and Lucas, but leaving his 10-year-old unharmed. Now, according to police, sometime overnight, Jonathan and Lindsay became involved in an altercation. Jonathan then, quote, armed himself with a gun and he shot her several times. At that point, he reportedly started going through the house and systematically killing their children. There was actually just one child found in his bed, with investigators saying that they were hunted down and killed. Now, aside from that, we know investigators didn't find any signs of a struggle, and that ultimately they found 2 bodies upstairs and 2 bodies downstairs. They say that why the youngest wasn't killed remains a mystery, and that he was released to other family members at the scene. There were also no previous calls to the residence or reports of domestic violence, and it seems like everyone is wondering what happened. Lindsay Candy was known to be a wonderful mother, and 18-year-old Dylan just graduated from the local high school last year. Ethan was a 9th grader there, and Lucas was a 6th grader at the intermediate school. And anyone with information that could help this investigation is asked to contact the homicide tip line at the number above. The 18-year-old has been killed the day after graduating high school, and this is what we know so far. On Friday night, Lily celebrated with her friends and family, but the very next day, she was shot by another graduate. Around 9 p.m., we know there was a group here just hanging out when a witness saw 18-year-old Matthew Raphael pull a gun from the trunk of his car. Sources actually vary on what exactly happened next, but he ended up shooting Lily in the shoulder, reportedly not thinking that the gun was loaded. Now, as we know, this same witness immediately took Lily to the hospital and called 911 along the way. The dispatcher then actually instructed them to pull over on the side of the road and wait for EMS assistance. Shortly after, EMS did show up and took Lily to Vanderbilt Medical Center, but she tragically died of her injuries. Now, as for Matthew, he had reportedly driven to another hospital looking for Lily, and that's where he was arrested. He again reportedly admitted to police that he was the shooter, but said that he thought the gun was unloaded and that it was unintentional. It's also not clear how the teens knew each other, but Matthew had graduated from Ravenhood High School, which is about 10 miles away. As of today, Matthew was charged with criminal homicide, but he was actually released on Tuesday on a $150,000 bond. And as for Lily, she was known to be an incredible friend and to light up every room that she walked into. I currently can't find a GoFundMe that we can donate towards, but if anyone knows of one, please let us know in the comments. A 19-year-old's body has been scattered across the Milwaukee area after she went on a first date. Last Monday night, Shade told her building secretary about how she was so excited to go out for seafood with 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson. She never returned home, and when she missed her shift the next day, everyone knew that something was wrong. Now, when police looked at Shade's phone records, they found the pair went to Twisted Fisherman around 5 p.m., and then they actually went out for drinks and went back to Maxwell's house. You can see it was 12:45 when her phone left that residence and started pinging at local parks. Shade's work actually closed for the next 3 days to search for her, as investigators began to find a disturbing trail of evidence. On Tuesday morning, Shade's car was found burnt in an alley at 30th and Lisbon Street. Inside the vehicle, there was her clothing and part of her iPhone, and in the surrounding area, there was reportedly human flesh and a foot. Then, later that same afternoon, a passerby, quote, found a leg that had been sawn off at the hip down a bluff at Ornament Park. Over the next 2 days, more partial remains were found in the area, and tragically some of those have already been determined to be Shade. Now from here, using phone records and surveillance footage, police quickly determined that they were looking for Maxwell. They actually had video of him taking the bus after lighting Shade's car on fire, and they found blood and canisters of gasoline at his house. He was ultimately pulled over on the morning of April 4th and charged with first-degree murder, mutilating a corpse, and arson. Now, aside from that, we know Maxwell's neighbors have described him as keeping a low profile and occasionally seen walking his dogs. He's worked at several bars in the area where he's been described as a good coworker, well-liked, and not the type to do this. He also does have a criminal history, which consists of disorderly conduct and domestic violence charges. In one of these cases, he destroyed the property of 2 of his relatives, and in the other, he beat a man on Milwaukee Street. As of today, Maxwell is being held on a $5 million bond, as police continue to search and try to figure out what happened. And as for Shade, she graduated high school a semester early and was about to graduate with an associate's in criminal justice. Community members have said, quote, "It could have been any one of our daughters. She was just going on a date. Who could have expected it to end like this?" Prosecutors have announced that they will seek the death penalty for the murder of Lauren Heike. If you've been following, you know that on April 28th, Lauren was followed, chased, and stabbed on a North Phoenix hiking trail. It wasn't until 24 hours later when a 911 caller reported a possibly deceased female lying in the desert area behind her house. As we know, when officers were en route to the scene that morning, they actually received another request to check on a young esthetician who had missed work. The call had come from one of Lauren's friends, and she was even more concerned that her phone still showed she was on the trail she hiked yesterday. When police did get to this area off the main trail, they tragically found it was Lauren and that she was the victim of a homicide. Blood, ripped clothing, and the personal belongings she dropped would horribly show the exact path where she ran for her life. Based on the evidence, it was clear Lauren was chased down the Route 11 trail before being viciously attacked from behind. She was repeatedly stabbed but tried her hardest to put up a fight, with defensive wounds and the chase even going over a barbed wire fence. Investigators tragically believe that she may have eventually escaped, but her injuries were too severe to keep going. From here, police obtained surveillance footage from the area, and chillingly, they could see that someone had been following a couple minutes behind Lauren as she walked down the trail. They also managed to get a DNA sample from her shoe, and that is what turned up 22-year-old Zion Teasley in court records. He lived just a mile from the scene and was recently arrested for armed robbery, but was listed as a medium-low risk to reoffend and got a plea deal. With that, police went to Zion's former workplace, and they confirmed he was the man from the footage. They also said he was recently fired for being aggressive towards female employees, and that he was known to carry a pocket knife with a 3-inch blade. Again, as we know, on May 6th, Zion was finally taken into custody. He reportedly immediately admitted he was at the scene, and when asked about Lauren, quote, said he recognized her from the news and that he wanted to look like her. Officials wrote in the arrest affidavit that he struggled to admit Lauren was murdered and instead talked about his life growing up as a Christian and his internal struggles with his sexuality. Today, prosecutors seek the death penalty against Zion, who again was already on parole and actually met with his probation officer between killing Lauren and being arrested. He pleads not guilty to the charges against him, and Lauren continues to be missed by her friends and family. This case continues to be one that young women everywhere should be aware of.
Blake Linkus is unbelievably out on bail after strangling his ex-girlfriend. If you've been following, you know that last June, Natalie was murdered on her senior trip to Myrtle Beach. Her ex-boyfriend has already confessed to locking himself in a room with her body, but now he's home under the supervision of his parents. We now know that on the night of June 6th, the group of Ohio graduates all left their Airbnb to go out to a local club. But according to one of Natalie's friends, she ended up not feeling well and returned back to the house early with Blake. By 10:45, 2 more of their friends had returned, and they actually had to go around the back because the couple wouldn't answer the front door. Now, after managing to get inside, we know these friends heard 3 loud thuds, but when they checked Natalie and Blake's room, that door was locked too. They likely assumed it was nothing and carried on with their night, not realizing something awful had happened. Everyone else in that house was reportedly in bed by 7 a.m., but just 2 hours later, they would all wake up to a nightmare. Again, as we know, at 9 a.m., Blake bursted out of the bedroom, bleeding from a self-inflicted stab wound to the chest. He was reportedly just screaming that Natalie wasn't waking up, so of course, 2 of her friends rushed in there to find her on the floor. They immediately called 911 and tried to give her CPR, but it was clear that they were too late. Their friend was cold and stiff to the touch, and even EMS could reportedly tell that she'd been strangled the night before. Now from here, police conducted their initial questioning, and within 2 days, they arrested Blake. He reportedly immediately confessed to killing Natalie after an argument, with them recently breaking up after a 3-year relationship. The couple had seemingly gotten on good enough terms to go on this trip together, but according to one of Natalie's friends, he threw her across the room at one point, and they were arguing the night before over another guy. Now, as for the case today, we know Natalie's parents initially pleaded with the judge to not let their daughter's killer be free. They wrote an entire statement about how this should be an easy decision, but ultimately, the court disagreed. It was ruled that Blake could post a $150,000 bond, and again, he's just required to be on house arrest with his parents. The judge has actually said, quote, "There is nothing in Mr. Linkus's background, young though he is, that has indicated he is a person of violence. In this particular case, he has not denied responsibility. He has acknowledged it, he's recognized it to the best he can." Natalie was known to live her life to the fullest, with a contagious laugh and a personality that could bring anyone out of their darkest days. If you would like to donate towards her GoFundMe, the link will be in my bio.
Trial has officially begun for the murder of mom of 5, Jennifer Dulos. If you've been following, you know Jennifer vanished from her Connecticut home in the midst of a years-long custody battle with her husband. She was last seen dropping her kids off at school on January 24th, but then she didn't show for her 11 a.m. doctor's appointment. Jennifer's friends ultimately reported her missing that night, with police arriving at the scene to find the floors and walls of her garage covered in blood. Now from here, police obviously caught up on the fact that Jennifer's husband was having an affair, and she was renting this house to get both she and her kids away from his abuse. They decided to obtain surveillance footage from the neighborhood, and that is when they saw something chilling. Someone had showed up to Jennifer's house on a bike that morning, and he was waiting to kill her in the garage when she got back from dropping her kids at school. As we know, over 2 hours later, Jennifer's car left the house again, but police don't think she was the one driving. They tracked her vehicle down to find it abandoned in a local park, and after checking surveillance there, they also found what appeared to be a getaway truck. The thought is that it was previously driven there to transport Jennifer's body, and with everything considered, police began tracking her husband and his girlfriend's movements. As police
would learn that same night, Fotis and Michelle were seen in the getaway truck dumping black trash bags into 30 separate dumpsters. Authorities immediately went to these locations and they found bloody clothing, zip ties, and cleaning supplies that all had Jennifer's DNA. With that, on June 1st, Fotis and Michelle were officially charged with tampering with evidence. Without a body, there just wasn't enough for a murder charge, and they both posted bail. As investigators continued to build their case in 2019, they executed search warrants at the property where Jennifer previously lived with Fotis and the kids. There, they first found what they have come to call alibi scripts. 2 scripted documents written by Fotis and Michelle that detailed what they would tell police they did on the day Jennifer disappeared. They also found proof that the couple had paid in cash to have the getaway car professionally cleaned. There was still no body though, so in September, they were again both charged with tampering with evidence and both posted bail. From here, things were actually quiet for a few months, but come January of 2020, the couple was finally charged with Jennifer's murder. I can't begin to understand why this was an option, but for the 3rd time, they posted bail. Fotis was due to show up in court on January 28th, but he didn't, and police found him unresponsive at his house. He had poisoned himself with carbon monoxide and ultimately passed away on January 30th, 2020. That leaves Michelle and actually one of Fotis' friends to face charges in this case. Today, Michelle stands trial for conspiracy to commit murder, and while her story has changed a million times, she maintains she has no idea what happened to Jennifer or where she could be. Jennifer, of course, remains missing, and a judge actually declared her deceased earlier this week. I will keep you guys updated, but may this hopefully lead to some answers or justice in this case.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
There are finally updates in the horror case of a Hawaii mom and her 8-year-old daughter. If you've been following, you know Thelma was ambushed in a machete attack at an Oahu vacation home. It shocked the island, and she tragically died not knowing if the young couple would kill her daughter next. Makana did survive though, and today at just 14, she has told the court everything. As the jury heard on December 7th, Thelma went about the seemingly perfect arrangement she had with her daughter. She worked part-time at her school and then brought her right along to clean this vacation home on the North Shore. She of course had no idea that she was walking into a robbery. Again, according to Makana, she was waiting in the truck watching a movie when a man with green hair came up and told her, quote, "We just killed your mother." She said he then carried her into the house, followed by the girl, and they tied her to a bedpost in the master bedroom. She was left unable to scream with her mouth duct taped shut, but thankfully she never saw her mother's body. As we know, at 3:20, the new family renting the property arrived, and they actually ran away after walking into a nightmare. Police arrived shortly after that, but while Makana was still alive, Thelma was in a pool of blood with a bag over her head. A machete, meat tenderizer, bat, and knives were all left behind, along with a wallet belonging to Stephen Brown. Now from here, Thelma's husband Kevin was called to the scene, and it was so bad he wasn't even allowed to go inside. He was able to see his daughter though, and she had something to tell him. Right there she said, quote, "There was a guy and a girl. The girl's hair was pinkish and the guy's hair was green like Halloween." With that, Kevin managed to get his hands on a photo of the suspects, and his family offered a $100,000 reward on social media. And shortly after that, 75 people surrounded them and Thelma's truck at a local Walmart. As they were being arrested, they reportedly told police to shoot them because they knew their lives were over. Now, as we know, and this wasn't easy for the family, but trials for Stephen and Haley were held separately. At Stephen's trial, he told the court how he and his girlfriend entered the property through an open window. He said that shortly after entering, Thelma walked in, and it was Haley who forced her to lie down and tied her up with rope. He said he went outside to secure the perimeter, but when he came back, Thelma was dead and Haley was covered in blood. The thing is, at Haley's trial, she said that none of that was true. She blamed everything on Stephen and said that she wanted to run, but he forced her to participate. She also spent a lot of time talking about how he physically abused her and she was stuck in this relationship. In the end, Stephen and Haley were both found guilty, and this past month sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. And to that, Thelma's husband Kevin has asked if this is a joke. He asked if his wife could get a second chance to be a mother, or if his daughter could get a second chance to have one. He really just continues to reiterate that what the justice system has put them through is unacceptable. Today, Makana is still living with her father, and everything considered, she seems to be doing really great. If you would like to support this family, the link will be in my bio.
Chad Daybell is finally facing the death penalty for the murders of Tylee and JJ. If you know the case, you know the siblings were last seen in Idaho in September of 2019. The thing is, no one knew they were missing for nearly 3 months. Their mom, Lori, has since been convicted of their murder, and today her 5th husband, Chad, is on trial. Now, going back to February of that year, we know that Lori's 4th husband, Charles, filed for a divorce. She had become obsessed with Chad Daybell's doomsday books, and with that, started acting really strange. She became romantically involved with the author that spring, and genuinely thought they were the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, as we know, Charles then tried to tell police that he was scared for he and the kids' safety, but by midsummer, he was dead. On July 11th, so about 2 months before the kids went missing, he went by Lori's new place in Chandler to pick up JJ for school. As soon as he got there, he was shot to death by her brother, or the kid's uncle Alex. Unbelievably, it was initially ruled to be in self-defense. This is actually a photo of Lori just after her husband was shot, and this is a screenshot of the message she sent breaking the news to his sons from a previous marriage. Now, following Charles's death, we know that Lori moved herself, the kids, and Uncle Alex to Idaho to be closer to Chad Daybell. Again, the kids were publicly last seen there that September, but no one knew they were missing. No one knew that the couple had determined them to be zombies, or that they were buried in Chad's backyard. Now, with the kids unknowingly gone, October came, and Chad's wife Tammy suddenly died in her sleep. It reportedly appeared to be natural, and therefore, he and their 5 kids decided not to perform an autopsy. Tammy was buried with no one knowing that she was actually asphyxiated, and then Chad and Lori fled off to Hawaii together. They got married on November 6th, and it was 3 weeks after that when JJ's grandparents realized no one had seen the kids. Now again, as we know, in February of 2020, Lori was finally arrested for failing to produce her children. And then, after another 4 months, police finally ascended on Chad's property and discovered human remains. They reportedly first found JJ, who was buried with a plastic covering over his head and still wearing his pajamas. Then they found Tylee, who was dismembered and burned to the point that investigators didn't think it could be a body. It was reportedly clear that Chad, Lori, and Uncle Alex were all involved. Now from here, Chad and Lori were obviously charged with murder, and more came to light about why they did this. It naturally doesn't make sense, but they reportedly believed that they were chosen to save the world, and that they had to kill these kids because they had evil spirits. Of course, on the other side, there's the belief that it was all just a scheme to be together and obtain benefits from life insurance. In May of 2023, Lori Vallow was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Again, now Chad is on trial, and it's supposed to go on for the next 9 weeks. If Uncle Alex were still here, I'm sure he would have a trial too, but he has also since suspiciously died. It is actually kind of crazy just how many deaths Lori Vallow is linked to. There's Tylee, JJ, Charles, Tammy, and Alex, but then there's also Joseph and Stacy. Future charges are expected, and I will keep you guys updated with the trial. New details have come out with Hannah Clark and why her husband burned their family alive. If you know the case, you know Rowan publicly doused his wife and 3 kids in gasoline, and then he lit the match. He threatened the bystanders who tried to save them with a knife, but Hannah still managed to escape the fire and tell police what happened before she died. That morning, Hannah woke up the kids at her parents' house in Camp Hill, but as she was loading them into the car for school, Rowan reportedly just showed up on the driveway. And this was a problem because she had moved there specifically to get away from him. The couple met back when she was 19, and he was a 31-year-old married father, and since then, he'd quite literally made her life a living hell. As we know, Rowan went on to force his way into Hannah's SUV, carrying a can of petrol he had just purchased at a service station. She screamed at him to get out, but even with their 6, 4, and 3-year-olds in the back seats, he still demanded that she start driving. With that, we know that Hannah did start to follow Rowan's directions, but then in one last effort to get help, she made a turn down a residential neighborhood. She rolled down her window and started screaming for neighbors to call police because, like she had tried to tell everyone, her husband was going to kill her. Tragically, investigators believe that she was his only intended victim, but because she wasn't cooperating, it was at this point that Rowan switched to his plan B. In a matter of seconds, neighbors heard what sounded like a bomb going off, and the vehicle exploded with everyone inside. Hannah managed to get out completely engulfed in flames, but as a bystander hosed her down, there was only one thing on her mind. She started mumbling something about how her kids were still in the car, and she couldn't save them. After realizing there were children, obviously more people tried to get into this burning vehicle, but there was nothing they could do. Even if it weren't for the heat and the flames, Rowan had also gotten out of the car, and he was guarding it and threatening anyone who came close with a knife. From here, and in front of what had become a crowd of local residents, Rowan fatally stabbed himself in the chest. He made sure his kids died with him, which again, didn't seem to be a part of his initial plan. There was actually a note found on his phone written to Hannah, in part reading, quote, "I can't take it anymore, I'm finishing your game. Do you know how hard it is to go to bed without your children? I wish you would have just tried. I've told the kids you loved them. We will all miss you." The letter ultimately blamed Hannah for everything, and the evidence at the scene suggested he intended to tie her up, burn her, and then take off with the kids. Again, this likely changed when she stopped cooperating. By the time paramedics got to the scene that day, they found Hannah with burns to 97% of her body, and they could tell she also wasn't going to make it. They figured all they could do was make her comfortable, but unbelievably, she wanted to give a statement. Before Hannah passed that afternoon, she told police about how she had filed protection orders to get Rowan away from she and her kids. Court documents list hundreds of incidents that clearly show this wasn't mental illness, but rather narcissism and a complete need for control. As we know, some of Hannah's last words were, quote, "I hope Rowan survives and I hope he rots in prison for the rest of his life." But of course, no one in the family survived this awful day. In Hannah's case, even doing everything wasn't enough, and she couldn't give her daughters the life she planned for them. With so many warning signs and failed attempts at protection orders, this is a case that everyone should be aware of. For those wanting more information, I'm going to link the incident reports from this case and the link to Hannah's foundation in my bio.
In one of the most terrifying cases, there was a 7-hour home invasion and just one survivor. The Pettit family was known to live the perfect life in Cheshire, Connecticut, up until July 22nd when they became random targets. That night, around 7 p.m., Michaela was so excited to make pasta for her family, so her mom took her to Stop and Shop to pick up the ingredients. Neither of them could have known that while they were there, they had caught the attention of someone else. Reportedly drawn by the 11-year-old and the looks of the family's wealth, Joshua Komisarjevsky would go on to follow the pair in the store and then the 3 miles back home. The family would go about their usual Sunday night watching movies together, again completely unaware that he was sitting outside making a plan with his friend Steven. They'd sneak into the house, tie the family up, steal some cash or maybe some jewelry, and then finally make a getaway that would, quote, leave everyone unharmed. As we know, at 3 a.m., Steven broke in through the basement cellar, and he was supposed to go upstairs and let Joshua in through the front door. But as Joshua waited outside, he could see through the living room window that things were already going wrong. Mr. Pettit had apparently fallen asleep on the living room couch, and Steven was just beating him in the head with a baseball bat. With that, Joshua too entered through the cellar, and he and Steven agreed. They would need to keep the girls and their mom away from Mr. Pettit so that they wouldn't panic over the blood. They decided to tie him to a pole in the basement, and then they headed up to the second floor. Michaela had actually fallen asleep in her mom's room reading Harry Potter, so they, quote, gently woke the pair from their sleep and reiterated that they were only there for money. From here, Michaela, Haley, and Jennifer were all tied to their respective beds, while Joshua and Steven began ransacking the house for valuables. They actually didn't find anything expensive like they thought, but they did find Jennifer's checkbook, indicating that she had $30,000. After seeing this, they reportedly came up with a whole new plan. When morning came, Jennifer tried to offer the assailants breakfast, but Steven took her to the bank to withdraw the money. She obviously had a really difficult decision to make when she got to the teller, but she calmly explained that her family was being held hostage, and if she didn't come back with this, they would all be killed. She didn't even have her ID, but the teller still gave her $15,000 in cash and then immediately contacted police. Now, unbelievably, before Jennifer and Steven even got back to the house, officers had already driven by and determined that nothing seemed out of place. They actually watched the pair go back inside from where they were parked down the street, but they were instructed not to interfere. The lieutenant also told the hostage negotiator not to come, as it, quote, was believed that Jennifer could be involved somehow. As we know, Joshua and Steven ended up seeing the officers outside, and they became filled with rage thinking Jennifer had called them there. What happened next is actually up for debate, because the guys blame each other. Regardless, Jennifer was strangled to death, and her daughters were assaulted and left tied to their beds. Now again, from here, and with police still outside, the guys reportedly went downstairs to get what they would need to start a fire. They expected to find Mr. Pettit still tied to that pole in the basement, but he had just heard his wife being killed and had gotten a rush of adrenaline. At this point, he was rolling through the lawn towards his neighbor's house with his legs still bound. Now, tragically, as soon as Mr. Pettit made it over to his neighbors, officers began to see and smell smoke. Somehow, Steven and Joshua initially forgot to grab the $15,000, and they ended up backing the family's SUV into a police car that had been waiting at the end of the driveway. In the end, police couldn't get to Haley or Michaela in time, and they tragically died from a combination of the fire and the smoke. Even worse, Haley managed to break through her restraints, but then she collapsed at the top of the stairs. With Steven and Joshua in custody, they both blamed each other, and Steven told police he was having nightmares about his own children dying in a fire. Their trials were held separately, but while they were both sentenced to death, the death penalty was then abolished in Connecticut in 2012. And they have since both been resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
A new interview has only left more questions about what happened to Harley Dilley. On the Friday before winter break, Harley vanished on his walk to school in Port Clinton, Ohio. 4 weeks later, his body was found just 400 feet from his home. Seemingly that entire time that everyone was searching for him, he was in the chimney of the house right across the street. We now know that on December 20th, Harley's school did call his mom to say he never showed, but her voicemail was full and she didn't call back. She and her husband reportedly just assumed he was at a friend's that entire weekend, with it being 41 hours before they contacted police. Now on Saturday night, officers wasted no time going by all of Harley's friends' places and crossing them off the list. The searches continued as Christmas came and went, and with still no leads in January, both the FBI and the CBI were brought in. According to the local police chief, one of the CBI agents immediately requested to see Harley's neighborhood. He took her over there, and again right away, she inquired about this green 2-story house across the street. The chief explained that it was an empty summer home with no signs of forced entry, and that their scent dogs didn't pick anything up outside. With that, still, this agent was adamant that they restarted square one and take a second look for Harley. That's exactly what they did, and while they found that the windows on this house were secure, there was also a lockbox on the front door, and clearly ongoing renovations. The police chief actually called the owners, and after explaining the situation, the elderly couple was of course happy to let them take a look around. Upon going upstairs, officers would find a red puffer coat, a jersey, and a pair of boys' glasses on one of the bedroom floors. All of this was directly under a vent hole, which would have opened up to the house's chimney. And while in a lot of cases we would see these chimneys go down to the first floor and open up to a fireplace, that wasn't the case here. There used to be a wood-burning stove there on the second floor, so the vent hole was used for heat ventilation through the chimney. Whoever removed that stove, and whenever they did, they bricked off the chimney completely, so it did not go down to the first floor. Now, initially with these findings, police didn't know what to think, because Harley being in there wasn't really plausible, and there weren't any smells of decomposition. They ended up putting a camera in the vent hole just to take a look, and when they still couldn't see anything, one of the officers made the decision to reach his hand inside. Horribly, he felt what he has described as a head of human hair. With that, and brick by brick, police dismantled the chimney and found Harley in the 9 by 13 inch opening. He was positioned with his head tilted towards the roof and had tragically died of positional asphyxiation. It was like any smell of decomposition had been locked in that chimney, and the coroner almost immediately ruled that it looked like an accident. As we know, today police believe that Harley, quote, climbed up the house's antenna tower that morning and one way or another slid down into the chimney and got stuck. They actually think he was trying to hide and not go to school, that he first got stuck right above the vent hole and he was taking his clothes off in an attempt to make himself smaller. They think this worked and he slid down further just to get stuck again where the chimney was bricked off. Now, of course, on the other side of this case, there's the belief that what happened to Harley was not an accident. You see, back before Harley disappeared, he had this YouTube channel where he would reveal his address and sometimes do live streams without a shirt. This attracting a predator could be one angle, but also just listen to this clip from one of his videos.
We argued for about a good 5 minutes. And then she snapped and she locked me out of the house. So right now I'm outside. Yep, the house is locked. It is 3:30. I haven't ate anything. If you knew what was going on in my life. It's just been a horrible week.
So from that, it's clear things weren't great at home. What we know is that Harley was actually diagnosed with Asperger's as a child, and then he got PTSD from being repeatedly beaten by his older sister. He was incredibly dependent and needed things in a very specific way, which could have been difficult a lot of the time. His mother even posted about how she didn't want kids, leading many to speculate. It's kind of like, why would you not check on or worry for your 14-year-old who had a fear of grass and needed to shower 4 times a day? They actually took away his cell phone, so it's not like he could have called for help. Today there are still so many unanswered questions in Harley's case, and I think one of the biggest reasons why is because him going up that ladder to go back down the chimney just doesn't make sense. But then again, I also wouldn't think it would make sense for someone to haul a kid up a TV antenna in broad daylight and then throw him down said chimney. On this one, let me know what you guys think.